Okay.
Okay, here we are. Donna, were you okay over there? Could you?
I don't think that mic was working either.
Why don't you?
I'm just officially calling the meeting to order. Hopefully the phone bridge. Can you hear us on the phone bridge? Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right. Thanks, Donna. And this is Donna Bethay Murphy, who we're extremely grateful for stepping in at the very late in the game and agreeing to chair the meeting today on a acting basis. So thank you, Donna. Now, today's meeting, you'll be voting on 3 reports. You received those reports several weeks ago for comment. I haven't received any comments from members of the council. There were, I think, on at least for 2 working groups, there were recommendations in the report that were directed at entities other than the FCC, which that happens frequently, and it can be dealt with easily. So I worked with the working group leaders myself, and we got that squared away. It didn't change the substance of the reports, just how the recommendations were focused. So I wanted you to know that. There were no additional reports. I didn't resend the reports out, but if the recommendations look a little bit different in what goes on the web, that's the reason. It's not substance, it's really procedural matters. So now, as I said, we have 3 reports to vote on today. The first thing we should do, even before we get to the formal business of the meeting, is determine if we have a quorum. Do we have enough people in the room? Okay.
How many people are in the room?
I mean, at the table?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have 28.
28?
And how many people on the phone?
She's on those, I think.
There were 8, but the phone bridge dropped, and I don't know if they're all back on. That was the technical difficulty.
Okay. All right. Well, then
If
let's...
you do roll call, we'll build a tower.
Sorry?
If you do roll call, we'll build a tower.
Yes, we will. I know a lot of these...
You guys, you should be sitting here. Matt and Howard, get over here.
We need you for quorum.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are 25 in the room.
There are 25 in the room. And what do we need? We need 5
31.
more?
31.
31, so we need 6 more.
There were 8 on the initial bridge.
And Brad is
Oh, you're
All
here
right.
for Nairobi.
All right, so get over there.
See, I'm much nicer than Juan.
Yeah.
Get over there.
Wherever you like, Brad.
Brad, if the state see that there's value in joining us at the table, we would love to have you join us at the table.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Brad.
But he counts. Okay, I think we'll have quorum.
We think we're good? Okay. All right, then let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn it back over to Donna.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff said, today we will vote on 3 recommendations and also hear progress reports from each of the active working groups. I know there's been a lot of hard work and good work that's been done here, and the amount of time people have put into the CSRIC it shows their dedication to the success of this group. I want to thank each of you personally, as well as the companies, organizations, and agencies that have lent your expertise and your time to this important endeavor. So without further delay, I'll move the meeting along, and I'd like to introduce Admiral Simpson, who'd like to give a few remarks.
Great. Donna, thanks so much, and thank you really for stepping up. And I think it's very appropriate really to have the satellite industry have the chair position today. So many exciting things going on in the world of satellites, and I'll just highlight one of them. Friday, I believe, the Orion launch will occur, and it's, for those of you that haven't been following space, the first significant milestone risk reduction event in the nation's journey to get a manned mission to Mars. And a launch in the space industry will take a craft that would be capable of carrying people in the future in the furthest orbital reach that we've had before for such a craft, and bring it back to the Earth to demonstrate some of those technologies necessary to ultimately get to Mars. I think it's just representative of what an amazing subsector that we've got within this industry that the U.S. Really can and should be very proud of. What we do every day in space positively impacts the communication sector in so many ways, and that launch is just indicative of the kind of things that you could only really do here. So Donna, thanks for stepping up and taking on this role today. Yeah. I'd like to also thank our outgoing chair, Larissa Herda, and welcome our new chair, John Shantz. Larissa has provided strong leadership as the chair throughout the first few years of the CSRIC 4 term. Our nation's networks are undergoing remarkable change over a relatively short span of time, and Larissa's leadership of CSRIC during this time has been invaluable. At the same time, though, I don't expect CSRIC 4 to skip a beat as John takes on his role. John is truly one of our nation's preeminent security leaders, not just cybersecurity, but security and risk in general in the communications sector. And he brings valuable breadth and depth to the CSRIC as they tackle significant challenges ahead. You know, if you look at the different subsectors within the communications environment that John has served in different capacities for various companies, it really is remarkable, and I think he's touched upon virtually all of them, with maybe the exception of space. John did request in his relatively recent selection was unable to clear his calendar for today, but he asked that I share the following remarks with you. I apologize that I can't join you for today's meeting, but wanted you to know how honored I am to have been appointed chair of CSRIC. I'm looking forward to hearing from CSRIC 4 working groups and launching CSRIC 5 in 2015. This is a great opportunity to collaborate with a range of exciting challenges for our industry, with lots of technical innovation and service evolution to provide to consumers and businesses. I look forward to working with Chairman Wheeler, to Admiral Simpson, the FCC, and all of you. John absolutely has expressed to me his excitement for his role as chairman, and we've asked him to both close out CSRIC 4 and cover for CSRIC 5. So to me, that is a great opportunity for us to maintain continuity, keep up momentum on some of the many important elements that you guys are working on. As we commence this second to last meeting of CSRIC 4, I'd like to reiterate what you all have heard many times, that the FCC's fundamental responsibility is to help ensure the ongoing security and reliability of our nation's communication networks and services. We must ensure that public safety calls go through, that emergency alerts are reliable and authentic, and that the core network communications infrastructure that we all count on is resilient. You all and the members of each of the CSRIC working groups have put in a great deal of hard work to help ensure these things. And we all that have been involved in CSRIC 4 know that this is an exciting and in some cases scary time where we're undergoing a technology transition from analog to digital, from copper to fiber to wireless, from older switch protocols to internet protocols, a convergence of services, just a number of elements of change that really create great opportunity, create great potential value for the market, but also, if we're not careful, expose us to risk factors that we'll regret later on not having addressed up front. So I'm very appreciative of the work that you all have been engaged in to help us facilitate getting the most value out of the tech transitions, improving the functionality and how those things serve the society, and balancing that risk by mitigating early on any potential downside
as we make the transition. Truly, a proactive industry posture that is measurable and accountable is at the heart of a cyber risk management strategy that we're striving for. You all, as the stakeholders in this communications sector, have been challenged to develop this approach yourselves. We expect your recommendations to be more flexible and dynamic than traditional regulation, and demonstrably more effective than blindly trusting the market to meet consumer security needs. But it relies on your active engagement and follow-through. I was recently invited to the cable industry's cybersecurity regular recurring meeting. Cable? Where's cable? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, Bill. With providers, CISOs and CTOs, and the discussion on more technical details of observed cyber threat activity, actions planned to address threats, and opportunities for collaborative defensive measures was very useful. It was really very helpful for me to see and for our staff to get kind of a pulse check on activity that's going on in each of your subsectors all the time, every time. So it's encouraging when you get to the details of efforts like that to really know that the industry gets it, and by and large, the industry is working to get after it. It's a great example, but a reminder of an important charge. America's infrastructure companies must step up, and we believe that the best way for them to step up is proactively, as if their businesses depend upon it, because truly they do. I get the sense that there's a growing awareness that in the communications sector, that the collaborative efforts are having significant value for single providers as well. Today, you'll hear about and vote on 3 final reports. Working Group 2 will present its finding and recommendations on geographic targeting, message content, and character limitation for the Wireless Emergency Alert System, or WEA. Working Group 8 will present its findings and recommendations on spatial requirements for undersea cable installation and maintenance. And I just note Bloomberg had a bit of a press report just as I was coming down here. Germany and Finland are pretty excited about a new submarine cable that's going to connect the two countries, all oriented on Finland's desire to become a hub of information services and products. Submarine cables play such an important role in ensuring that a country's markets not only can reach out to other areas, but others can reach into a country's markets. And it's such an important part of the value proposition of our communications markets that I'm very happy that this group has tackled some significant elements of risk associated with submarine cables. So, Kent, we're looking forward to that finding. Working Group 8 will present its findings and recommendations on natural disasters and other hazards can result in the destruction of vital communication assets, leading to disruptions to communications at times when users need them most. And Working Group 9 will present 2 reports, one with recommendations on backup power for critical communications assets, and the other with recommendations on how to transport facilities can be shared during emergencies. In conclusion, the FCC will never be as fast or as innovative as the Internet. The solutions to counter aggressive thinking adversaries will come from the front lines, your front lines, from the network operators and service providers that are under attack every day. And it is our near-term task to help develop a structure that provides us all with the right environment to help those frontline cyber warriors, and IT and communication providers succeed, and in doing so, enhance our nation's security. We want the companies themselves to take the lead, and we are confident that you will. Businesses need ever-changing, ever-ready, dynamic risk management, not a check-the-block list of compliance to address the cyber threats that their companies and our countries face. Consumers and the public at large also need those businesses to address cyber risk up front and throughout the life cycle as they consider, develop, and sustain communications products and services. We at the Commission will continue to make this a priority and seek to facilitate, to convene, to play a constructive role where we can in your success. Thanks.
Thank you, Admiral. And we appreciate those remarks and that vote of confidence in all the work that we're doing here. I'd like to start out now with Brian Joseph of CTIA for Working Group 2. He will present his item for vote, first for discussion and then for vote.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Admiral, and Jeff, and Lauren, and Susan, and thanks to the Council for the opportunity to present. I'm going to present both a status update of just the work we've been doing since our last meeting, very briefly, and then move to hand it over to Mike Gerber and Brian Daly. Brian Daly is joining via Conference Bridge. They were the co-chairs for our geo-targeting message content and character, limitation working group that you all have received the report and recommendations and will be voting on today. I'll go through the slides fairly briefly in terms of the status update. Since we presented earlier this year our report and recommendations on testing for wireless emergency alerts, we've been focused on 2 active sub-working groups. The one that you're going to hear the report and recommendations on today, the geo-targeting message content and character limitation. We never really came up with a snazzy, shortened name for it. It is quite a mouthful. But and then we've also launched our security sub-working group. And so these groups, in particular, the geographic targeting group, have been very active and meeting, quite a lot. Several times a week, and there's really just been a tremendous effort by that group, and what we saw were some tensions between what alert originators wanted to see, ideally, and then concerns on the part of those involved in the architecture and then the distribution, the carriers of the wireless emergency alerts, ensuring that in this moment where there would be a massive alerting, that it didn't overwhelm the networks, overwhelm the infrastructure. But we relied on a lot of the federal government agency research that had been done, a lot of the people who are involved on a day-to-day basis in the origination, the verification, and the distribution of those alerts, and as mentioned, a number of conference calls, and we'll delve into that in just a moment with Brian and Mike's presentation. And I'll just briefly mention that we were kind of looking at what might be available in the future, what dilemmas, what challenges this may provide for legacy technologies, and then certainly the most important thing is the public response, the public receiving these alerts in a way that is most relevant, most beneficial, and gets them to safety when they need it. And so we evaluated a number of key issues that Mike and Brian will discuss with you in a moment. We also have the security subgroup that is looking at the really all touch points of originating and sending a message all the way to the recipient. So the origination, transmission, distribution, and the receipt. And while we're pleased that there haven't been any security issues that have come up, no breaches, this is something that I think folks agree we need to be vigilant in protecting against. And so that group continues its efforts. Recognizing that we've got really not much time left with this CSRIC 4, the hope is to launch one final sub-working group to address alerts targeting non-English speakers. We think that there's some work that has been done to date on that, and we can quickly convene and come up with a report and recommendations to address broader dissemination to non-English speakers of those alerts. Obviously, we'll be continuing with the regular weekly calls and providing updates to the steering committee and then the full CSRIC.
Thanks. And I just wanted to jump in here, Brian, and remind the members on the phone bridge to please mute their microphones. Thank you, because we can hear the webcast coming back through the system. So thank you.
Thanks, Donna. And yes, Admiral?
Brian, just a quick question about the non-English speaking value of the wireless emergency alerts. Are the states involved in your working group? Do we have a NARUC rep or somebody? Actually, NARUC probably wouldn't be the right one for EAS, but we see a significant role in the development of state plans when it comes to emergency alerting, and I would just hope that there'd be some kind of interface with the states as you develop
in terms of broader state representation. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and that's one that we'll take back and would love to. Brad, but would love to involve kind of the broader state group representation. I will say that we do have state and then local representatives from the alert originator community to speak to that. But I think involving a higher level state representative would make a lot of sense, and we can follow up on that suggestion.
Yeah, because this is one area where it seems to me that one size doesn't fit all, and the states really, I think, have a much better appreciation for the other language needs within each of their states.
Sure.
And the utility of incorporating other language opportunities in alerting capabilities.
Sure. Thank you. And so actually, the one exception, I hope, to muting on the conference bridge, I would ask Brian Daly, who is the co-chair. If we could just pull the slides back up. He, along with Mike Gerber, who is here present, but Brian Daly should be on the conference bridge. Brian, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, Brian. I'm here.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Daly to run through the first part of the presentation.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Daly
And Brian Daly, we may be hearing some echo. If you have, if you could turn down the speaker on your phone, thank you. And Brian, I'll turn it to you now.
Thank you. Brian, I'll turn it to you now. Good. Thank you. Yes. But how's the audio? Is it coming through okay?
We can hear you. I just also want to make sure that others have their lines muted. I think we're hearing a few echoes and reverberation. And then if Brian Daly, if you can just turn your speaker down a little bit to ensure that we don't have the echo on yours.
Daly, if you can just turn your speaker down a little bit to ensure that we don't have the echo on yours. Yeah, I have my speaker turned down quite low. I think there's others that are. There we go. Yeah, I have my speaker turned down quite low. I think there's others that are. There we go.
Again, I think they're.
All right, so let me give this a try, and please interrupt if the audio is not coming through well. So what I would like to do is give a try, and please interrupt if the audio is not coming through well. So what I would like to do is give a brief introduction and overview of the findings from the Geo-Targeting Message Length and Message Content Working Group. So if we can bring slide 8 up. From the Geo-Targeting Message Length and Message Content
Hey,
Working
Brian,
Group.
it's Jeff. Hey, Brian.
Within this group, the biggest challenge, as Brian mentioned, was to enhance WIA and taking into account the needs of the alert originators without harming the commercial wireless networks. The alert originators have a need to personalize, split, and improve public response based on the outcomes from various social studies and long-known tenets of public alerting. They have the desire to increase the length, supplement the WIA broadcasts with graphical information such as the recipient's location along with the map of the threat area, a photo of the suspect or missing child, etc., and to improve geo-targeting granularity. The wireless industry has concerns about the feasibility of some of those enhancements as well as impacts to cellular networks and making sure the enhancements are consistent with voluntary election to participate in WIA and also compliance with their obligations under the WARN Act, especially maintaining liability protection. Next slide, please. The biggest challenge we had was obtaining consensus on supplementing WIA with graphical information and enhancements. And the biggest reason for this is that WIA uses what's known as cell broadcast technology, which is a text-based technology. And other solutions that were investigated may have potential negative impacts to CMSP infrastructure. It's understood, the alert originator's need for this and desires to leverage some of the built-in capabilities of the mobile devices, such as location finding, maps, and internet connectivity. As a result, what's needed is a feasibility study to be done in the ATA Standards Organization to consider several alternatives as well as potential impacts to the commercial service provider networks. And there's also a number of intellectual property rights issues that may preclude advancements. And most notably, these are with regard to geofiltering of alerts at the device level. And the working group recommends that the FCC work to address these intellectual property rights issue. Next slide. As far as message length recommendations, with the current 90-character message length for WIA messages, it's understood, from the alert originator perspective, it's difficult to craft a message using 90 characters. So we set out within the working group to look at various capabilities within the commercial service provider networks, and following technology confirmation by the standards groups, most notably ATIS, it's recommended that the FCC modify the character limit rule, allowing a WIA message to have a maximum length of 280 characters of displayable text for 4G LTE-based devices and infrastructure. The existing 90-character limitation, which was really based on legacy 2G and 3G networks, should remain in effect and also apply to legacy 4G networks based on the limitations of those networks. The participating CMS provider, LTE infrastructure, as well as the other components in the end-to-end system for supporting WIA, such as the FEMA IPAWS Federal Alert Gateway, should support 280 displayable characters within 2 years after the completion of the industry standards. And those standards modifications should be complete within 1 year after the issuance of the FCC report and order. Next slide. Geo-targeting recommendations. As of today, the major carriers really have done better than the current FCC rule of county level. And the recommendation coming out of the working group is for the modification of the geo-targeting rules to allow those participating CMSP providers to voluntarily transmit messages to areas below a county. That is, those are defined by a geocode circle or polygon that the alert originator provides in the alert messages. The rules must be flexible enough to understand that geo-targeting won't be consistent across any operator's network or across different operators' network due to design characteristics and constraints on the networks. And as mentioned, the major carriers already support this, and the alert originator should be encouraged to provide a polygon or circle when targeting a sub-county level WIA alert message. The industry, FEMA, and alert originators should collaborate on the development of a cell broadcast geo-targeting best practices industry standard, and this will be to define how to choose cell sites in relation to polygons and develop best practices for the selection of cell sites to broadcast WIA messages out of. In addition, it's also recommended that the industry, FEMA, and alert originators collaborate within the ATA Standards Organization on the development of a feasibility study for enhancing cell broadcast geotargeting, including looking at things such as mobile-assisted geotargeting, which was discussed extensively within the working group. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Mike Gerber for presenting a message content recommendations.
Okay, can we, just a question before we
Sure.
stop it? Yeah. Two questions. The first on the intellectual property issues. I wasn't sure whether you're asking the FCC to look into the issues and some barrier reduction there, or if you said the FTC
can you give a little more background on the IP issues?
So it was FCC.
Yes. I was actually. This is Mike Gerber, NOAA National Weather Service. I was actually going to speak to that in just a moment. I was going to point out that, but you raised it, so more than happy to answer the question. One good example would be the intellectual property rights over doing things like geographic filtering, and the IPR is a potential obstacle to being able to do something like that on the device. And so, the recommendation being that the FCC do what they can to essentially remove that obstacle or to smooth the way, if you will.
Okay, that's very helpful. The second question is I want to challenge, or maybe you can help me understand what I'm missing here, why we don't push back on the 90-character limitation as if the limitation originally was oriented around legacy cell phone technologies that are rapidly sunsetting, and recognizing that iPOS has invested in significant infrastructure built around the cap standard of 90 characters, it seems to me that we ought to work with FEMA to set a target that at some point improves upon the 90-character design standard, and that maybe seeks to align or harmonize with other commercial standards. You could, for example, take the what are tweets, 240 characters, and look at other short text message commercial examples and seek to adjust cap towards something where there's significant commercial investment anyway, that emergency alerting would naturally benefit from the activity in that space, instead of having a artifact of, 90, because when we first started it was 90, and having then all new investment around cap or iPOS be unique and not able to benefit from a commercial standard.
Right, and I should let Brian Daly speak to this because he may have a little more of the technical knowledge to be specific. But the 90, what was discussed with regard to different, and this was back in 2006 and 2007, wherein the 90 character limitation emerged. That was what all carriers could accommodate. And so that was based on the state of the technology, the air interfaces at that time, as well as cell broadcast. Now, with evolving technology and 4G LTE, there is this opportunity to expand. I think the report wanted to almost have the asterisk of, we recognize that there will be legacy devices out there that will only be capable of the 90, but I think as the recommendation reflects, it absolutely should ensure that we have with FEMA the ability to have an expanded character limitation. But Brian Daly, is there anything further that you wanted to explain with regard to the?
Thank you, Brian. The limitations of 90 characters that were originally, the recommendation out of the original SIMSAC came from the fact that we had multiple cellular technologies deployed in the field, and at least one of those technologies had a limitation on what could be broadcast out of the cell sites, and that's why 90 characters was chosen as the common base. As we see the evolution of technology converging to LTE, that offers us the capability to deploy, as recommended in here, more characters, and 280 was the consensus of the group. It's really not a FEMA iPOS or cap issue. It's really considerations on what can be reasonably can be broadcast from the cellular networks itself.
Okay, so you're not advocating in perpetuity 90 being the floor. In fact, you're suggesting quite the opposite. That we evaluate, should there be establishment of a new floor, and should we have elements of the service that aren't just constrained to the floor?
Correct. So we're raising the floor, but recognizing that, as until people change out some of their legacy handsets, you may still have some of these that are limited to the 90 character.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike. Oh, my turn. Great. Okay, thanks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Gerber. I work at NOAA National Weather Service, and I guess probably a couple of months into the effort, Brian Joseph called me and said, "Hey, would you like to co-chair this group, which I was already a member?" And sure, said happy to do so. I've been in the alerting business, if you will, in the National Weather Service for 22 years. So certainly an exciting opportunity for me, and appreciate being invited to present our recommendations today. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and get into the message content recommendations. So you've got this, you can see the slides there, the first couple of bullets. Basically what we're saying there in the first bullet is that a recommendation to allow a phone number to be included in the wireless emergency alert message for Amber Alerts. And that second one there, we're making clear that wireless emergency alerts is not only for weather but also for non-weather, making it clear that an alerting authority can activate wireless emergency alerts to convey essential information related to weather or non-weather events. Now, I don't know if Brian Daly is going to want to say any more about this because I understand there's some background to it, but from my perspective, I don't think this is actually adding anything new per se, but what it is doing is providing clarification, making it very clear to folks that we can be used for much more than just weather per se. The next 2 or 3 bullets, this is where I really want to place my focus. And I want to just say briefly and reflect on something that Brian talked about earlier, particularly from the alert origination perspective. These next 2 or 3 bullets are where we leaned heavily on the long-known tenets of public alerting and the DHS funded studies on mobile alerting. So those tenets and those outcomes, the outcomes of those studies, essentially emphasize that in order to improve public response, in order to improve public safety, public response to wireless emergency alerts, we really need to make sure that we personalize the threat. That is, that people need to know and they need to feel that the alert and believe that the alert is intended for them so that they can then make that, take that life-saving, decisive action. So we took this into consideration, and from the alert origination perspective, the outcomes of those studies were very important. So one of the outcomes from the studies was that we show some kind of map with the recipient's location and the threat area. And the focus groups in the study show that the vast majority of people properly interpreted the image. There were about 5% who did not. And so this third bullet, this recommendation, we want there to be further social science study to ensure that we have an optimum map so that everyone understands it. And also for non-weather, what is the optimal map for non-weather evacuation, for example? What about a radiological plume? What about an active shooter? And so forth. So that bullet, further social science study to be conducted to maximize public safety outcomes for provision of an image showing the threat area and recipient's location, as well as the use of other images. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for what we're talking about there. That next bullet, and I'll just read it and then I'll elaborate on a few of the points. And that is a recommendation that add a study and identify the feasibility and standardization and implementation considerations for supplementing the wireless emergency alert text with graphical information, which you've heard us mention a little bit of via broadcast of geocodes, embedded URL, EMBMS, which is a new term that a few of you may have heard of, especially those in the wireless industry, alternate data networks, and availability of the WE data to third-party developers and so forth. So let me just briefly hit on each one. When we talk about the broadcast of geocodes, there's one, and I've got to be careful how much I talk about this DHS study, but for example, there's one DHS study right now, it's been funded, that's basically, as I understand it, figured out how to take, let's say, a 25 vertice polygon and basically compress that into less than 100 characters, which is very impressive. So there's a small piece of information that could go a long way, we feel, if it were broadcast to the device. When we talk about embedded URLs, I know this was a hot topic, certainly in the SIMSAC going back to 2007. But the idea here from the alert origination perspective is that, if the social scientists are telling us that people are going to mill about the web on their device anyway once they get the wireless emergency alert, then why not, send people to some lightweight information on like a web page on a iPause server, for example. So we have better control over the information that people are seeing, and we know it's the official information, and so forth. When we talk about alternate data networks, we're talking about things such as Wi-Fi and satellite. There are some members of our group who are really adamant that those be taken into consideration as part of the feasibility study. And then we talk about things like third-party developers. Could we allow trusted third-party developers, for example, to access the WIA data for maybe mobile applications? So again, a lot of these are the kinds of things to better personalize a threat, and this is what that feasibility study is intended to look at. So hopefully, I've given you a good flavor of what that's about. And that the last bullet on this slide is that FEMA provide wireless emergency alert message training to the alert originators as they have been doing, but to also incorporate the local, some of the things that we've learned from the studies, which are the importance of incorporating a local and recognizable source, right? For example, we all know how everybody trusts the fire department, right? And National Weather Service is pretty well known, NWS, but maybe not so much, with some of the other agencies. And use the clearest possible language and best convey who is at risk in the message. So certainly having 280 characters is something I think that will give folks, we'll have something to work with. Next, please.
Brian, a couple questions.
Yes, go ahead.
First on the Amber Alerts. Your comments later on about URLs, I would imagine that where there's utility, including the phone number in an Amber Alert, there may similarly be value in including a URL, particularly if you're wanting to facilitate the anonymous provision of information by somebody that might have useful information regarding the Amber Alert, that doing that through a link may actually be as effective, or in some cases more effective, than just a phone number. Would that be an included element of the recommendation?
Do you want to talk? Because I know you're going to.
So I think that's something worth further consideration. The point being that in response, in particularly for the Amber Alert, you would have a smaller group of the citizenry that may have information to provide. It would not, as opposed to a radiological plume where you may have an overload that congests the wireless networks as everyone goes to a particular site. So I think that's something that with the folks at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, we can further discuss, and maybe that's something as we look at formally modifying the FCC rule. We get some comment and feedback on that, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. The second comment is really very pleased and excited that you're looking at the social science of how to rapidly look at graphical information from an emergency alert and determine what it means to you, its relevance to you, but also the action that it should motivate you to take. And it has me think about my son became an active gamer. He loves the Medal of Honor, a series of games. Well, they had a similar problem in the gaming sector of needing to really have the person playing the game have a good sense of the cues that they would get in the real world with where they were spatially vis-a-vis, in this case, the adversaries that were lurking all over the virtual battlefield. So I would encourage the group to, in addition to looking at the government research in this area, perhaps to look to the gaming sector and see whether there aren't some very interesting and applicable
visualization techniques that might be exportable to this particular effort. And the third area, I commend you on addressing the improvement of the range of entities in communities that can perform and inject. And as I visit PSAPs around the country, I see a significant variation in, a minority of PSAPs actually have the ability to inject right now into the emergency alert system. And I believe we ought to greatly increase the role of PSAPs vis-a-vis alerting, because quite often it's that 911 operator that gets the first indication that something's amiss within a community. And with Next Generation 911, they will have vastly increased input, sensor information at their workstation that would enable a useful inject. But we certainly would have to ensure that that's done to a protocol, to a standard that doesn't have communities say, whoa, we're overusing this alerting capability. So I think that work with perhaps APCO or NENA or some of the public safety communication bodies vis-a-vis that local inject piece would be particularly fruitful.
That's a great suggestion.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I probably should remind everybody that this is a feasibility study, but certainly from the alert origination perspective, the bottom line is: do people take action? Do people take that life-saving action? That's the goal of wireless emergency alerts for us. So, I just wanted to point that out. So there were some additional recommendations that I want to quickly run through, and this first one is actually one that was a bit contentious at first, but through further discussion and vetting, we came to agreement on it, and that is that recommendation that the FCC identify and establish a method for funding the design, development, and deployment of enhancements to WE, and this would include the commercial mobile service providers and other stakeholders. And can we get the slides back up on the screen, please? There we go. Thank you. So that's the first one there. So the next one being that the wireless industry. Let me give a little background here. Wireless industry had expressed particular concern about smaller commercial mobile service providers. And will they have the wherewithal to support enhancements to wireless emergency alerts? So the idea of this next bullet would be to allow a CMSP to reconfirm their election to supporting wireless emergency alerts, or to amend their election to support the enhancements. So it's FCC modify WE participation election procedures with an option for participating CMSPs to reconfirm their election, and a process to amend election to support any modifications or enhancements to WE rules. Okay. Technology neutrality, this is something that where we have a couple of more recommendations, something wireless industry was very adamant about. We understand that. And the first recommendation is one that reiterates that we be technology neutral, so that's based on industry standards. And that's where groups such as ADIS, who I think we've maybe mentioned earlier, and TIA would come in. So an emphasis on the technical neutrality, if you will. And the second bullet: prior to the adoption of the rules affecting WE, the FCC require any technical standards, protocols, procedures, and related requirements that are adopted be standardized and recognized, accredited industry bodies, and that have well-defined intellectual property rights policies. So this gets back to the IPR issues that Admiral Simpson was asking about earlier. So, more specifically, as I suggested before, we're talking about things like the potential for geographic filtering. And in order to do that, there may be some IPR issues that are essentially in the way, if you will. And so we have this recommendation as well, although it's not bulleted here, that the FCC address IPR issues which may stand in the way. That's a recommendation you saw in one of Brian's earlier slides. So that, I think, sums up the key recommendations that we have in the report. And at this point, we would recommend that the CSRIC Council approve the geo-targeting messaging, length, and message content subgroup report and recommendations. God, we need a better name for that.
Thank you, Mike, Brian, and Brian. At this point in time, I'd like to ask if there are any questions, additional questions or comments on this report and these recommendations. Yes.
Yes, just a broader comment, and that being at CSRIC 3, so you're addressing a specific IPR issue. At CSRIC 3, I said, as we were wrapping that up, that IPR needed to be addressed as we move off into the bold new world of next-gen 911 and just technology proliferation as it continues to roll out at breakneck speed. Where we are now, you're saying this one thing. I mean, next week or next year or next month, it could be another thing. And FCC, this is an area that FCC needs to address, and there are proposals before it to do such. But it needs to look at IPR because it's something that's not going to go away, and it will impede the progress in which we are able to implement the best that technology will provide the citizens of the United States for public safety.
Well said. Maurice, that's very helpful to recognize that while there's a specific element around IPR here that we'll want to follow up on, and we will follow up on, that an element of tech transition to that all digital, all IP environment would potentially have more of these, intellectual property issues that wouldn't naturally be resolved or efficiently be resolved by the market alone. It would be helpful if there's an industry concern regarding that. We've got an open docket on tech transition. I think providing an input to that docket with what you'd like to see preserved in the way of intellectual property actually preserving appropriate capitalization of functionality and not getting in the way of future capitalization around public safety-oriented innovation. That might be an appropriate vehicle to have us work on that in a substantive manner. Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Hello. Chris Homer from Public Broadcast Service. As shepherds of the warn system, and we're also active in ATSC 3.0, I think you alluded to collaboration on your last couple slides, but did you guys have any thought whether we're just going to forklift this into the next generation broadcast system for the WIA alert backup, or are we going to have a chance to rethink it? And if we do, this would probably be a good time because ATSC is very active in some of this areas of content delivery and what we're going to have for the next generation broadcast.
One of the things we did in working with the FCC, let's see, hopefully I'm answering the right question here, in working with the FCC on our committee, and we had James Wiley from the FCC who was in our group, and James, we looked to James occasionally for clarification, on some things, and one of the things that we did is, I don't know that we spoke to it so much here about the timing of our recommendations, but things like the feasibility study, I think we've got it set to be completed 1 year from the approval of, I'm trying to remember, of this group. The idea being here that with this work being done, that there would be an opportunity to get comments back into the during the I guess the comments on the report in order, or during that process, so that there would be time to take those things into consideration before anything were to go final. I'm not, I'm probably not the best to speak about the timing of FCC reports and orders and so forth, but we're trying to basically do this in a timely fashion.
But just to add to what Mike said, so we did have Dana Golub of PBS, participating in the working group, and apologies, we should have put in a slide to show all the folks who were part of the working group and part of the effort. But I think, as Mike said, the feasibility study, and we pointed to alternate data networks. I think that we'll look to some of the opportunities. So you mentioned public broadcast as the backup. I don't think there are any preconceived notions of forklifting one into the other, but I think everything would be on the table for such a study and further investigation.
Steve Souter, 911 Director in Fairfax County. I was intrigued by Mike's comments and Admiral Simpson's remarks relative to the utility of alerting and how it can be integrated with PSAPs or 911 centers. For those of us that live in the neighborhood here, we awoke yesterday morning to find out that sinkholes are not necessarily a phenomena of California or Florida. We had one about 2 miles from where we're sitting here today. And alerting certainly was employed, but if we had the future that you're talking about, Mike, and what you're alluding to, Admiral, it really could make for a much more effective community awareness of something that was as vital as that sinkhole was yesterday morning for anybody trying to get to work.
Any questions or comments from the bridge? Okay, hearing none. We are going to submit at this time the report and recommendations for a vote. We'll start with those in the room. All those in support of approving these, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say nay. All right, I'm going to move to the phone now. All those in support say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Aye.
Oh, I think that's feedback.
I think that was a latent time.
Yeah, I think so too. We're going to go with the feedback. Thank you very much. This item passes. Next, we'll hear from Working Group 8, Kent Bressie, submarine cable landing sites. Thanks, Kent.
Thank you.
Yeah, raise your hand, Ken. There you go.
Thanks, Brian.
Nope.
Try one more time.
No.
Do it one more time.
Try again? Great. Thank you, Donna. I'm sure a number of you have been wondering what has happened with Working Group 8 as we have been working on this first report for quite some time, but we're pleased to be presenting it today with the consensus of the working group and other participants. First, I'd just like to start by thanking Admiral Simpson and his staff in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, in particular Jeff and Lauren, for all of their support during this process, and also our working group liaison, Michael Connolly, who I saw come in a few minutes ago. So thank you. Your assistance helped produce this as well. So this is a matter that's a little bit unfamiliar, I think, to a lot of you, and it's certainly new to the CSRIC, as this is a new working group this year. Working Group 8 is examining, get to the right slide here, risks posed to submarine cable systems by other marine activities and infrastructure, and is looking at separation standards, intergovernmental coordination, and factors that influence the clustering of cables on particular routes and at particular landing sites, all of which can jeopardize the resilience of the U.S. communications network. And so we're making particular recommendations in these areas. Working Group 8 is smaller than a lot of the other working groups, but we've had some very active participants throughout. and I don't propose to go through all of them here. I'd just like to acknowledge the participation of the energy agencies, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Ann Miles and Stephen Bowler, and also Jennifer Galladay from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in the Department of the Interior. The submarine cable industry has not always seen eye to eye with these agencies, and that was the substance of a lot of our discussion in the meetings, but we are grateful for the continued participation of those agencies. This report is so much better because of their participation, and it's also more accessible to non-specialists, as they spent a lot of time in contributing to making it readable for those who don't work in the industry. So my thanks again to them. So with that, I'd like to present Report 1 on spatial separation, and I'm going to provide just a little bit of background about what submarine cable systems are and what operations are involved, because I think that for you all to be able to evaluate and vote on recommendations, it's helpful to have a little bit of context for why, in this case, there needs to be some consideration and standards or guidelines for spatial separation of different marine activities from submarine cables. And so in this report, we're really looking to provide a greater understanding of the spatial requirements and to recognize and implement spatial separation standards and methodologies, at least as background or default rules. Ultimately, the objective here is for activities in the marine environment to have industries and actors consulting with each other as early as possible in the planning process before they start any construction or repair activity. And we're also looking to develop standards and policies to ensure resilience of networks, as that's ultimately what we're concerned about here. I think some of you have heard me cite this statistic before, but more than 95% of all U.S. international voice, data, and internet traffic travels by submarine cable, and that's a percentage that continues to increase. But I think it's also worth noting that submarine cables also provide significant domestic connectivity within the states of Alaska and Hawaii, within some of the U.S. territories, such as the Northern Marianas and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and they connect all of the U.S. territories, Alaska and Hawaii, back to the contiguous 48 states. So they are also domestic communications infrastructure, not simply international infrastructure. There are currently 55, and it's a little hard to see here, they aren't individually labeled, but there are 55 submarine cable systems that land in the United States or its territories, and there are another 12 that have been announced or are currently under construction. Again, this map here is just showing the contiguous 48 and Hawaii. In particular, it doesn't show Guam, which, although it's in the western Pacific, it's an area where the FCC has licensing jurisdiction, and it is a major hub for submarine cable systems connecting within and to Asia. So submarine cable systems carry communications supporting trillions of dollars of U.S. economic activity each year. They provide access to internet content, a substantial portion of which is stored in the United States and accessed by foreign consumers. And that supports a lot of economic activity itself in the U.S. And they also carry the vast majority of civilian and military U.S. government traffic, as the government does not own and operate its own submarine telecommunications cables. So given the critical importance of this infrastructure, it is imperative that submarine cable operators be able to conduct timely repairs when there are outage events. Some of you might have seen earlier this week was not in the United States or affecting the U.S. this time, but an outage in the CME 3 system, which connects Perth, Australia, westward toward India, the Middle East, and Europe, greatly slowing down internet speeds in much of Australia. And so that ultimately is one of the concerns here, is the continuity of communications, maintaining high-speed internet connectivity for consumers and businesses. The FCC functions as the primary U.S. regulator of submarine cables and is responsible for licensing all of them, whether they're domestic or international. There are other state, local, and federal permits that are issued, but it really is the FCC that often plays, or other agencies look to the FCC to play a coordinating role on these issues. And certainly we're pleased, Admiral Simpson, to see your Bureau and the leadership it has shown on these issues in trying to encourage interagency discussions and coordination, because a lot of that has not existed before. No other agency collects as much centralized information about submarine cables as the FCC, and that's why we think it's particularly important to be making the recommendations that we are here today, as it really is FCC leadership and expertise that sets the FCC up to act on these issues. So I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell here, just because I think a lot of people are not familiar with what submarine cables look like. I'm going to pass around some samples of submarine fiber optic cable. These samples show what a cable installed in deep sea areas looks like. It just sits on the seafloor. It's not buried in deep sea areas. There are glass fibers in the center. There are insulating layers. There's a copper core for conducting power, and in shallow areas where there are risks from anchoring or commercial fishing, these cables are further armored to a slightly bigger diameter with steel wire rod, and where possible they're dredged and buried up to 2 meters in those shallow areas. These systems have a lifespan of 25 years. That's the design life, but they often are in service far longer than that. Submarine cable installation and maintenance is quite an activity in itself. Submarine cables are installed and maintained at some of the greatest ocean depths on the planet, and trying to install and maintain those in different weather conditions around the world is quite a challenge. These installation and maintenance activities are conducted by cable ships that are specifically built for this purpose. Some of you might have seen a couple of the ships that used to be in AT&T Depot up in Baltimore before the harbor tunnel. They are now part of TE Connectivity. TE Subcom is the fleet operator of those vessels that are up there. And these ships have specialized crews that work with specialized equipment for installation and maintenance. As you can see from, this is one of TE Subcom's Reliance class vessels here. These are cruise ship-sized vessels. They, for their own maneuvering, have spatial requirements, which we'll refer back to later on. So with these vessels, one of the challenges in the offshore environment, as there is increasing activity in the marine environment, is trying to navigate among other structures and activities. It's not just vessel traffic, it's also oil platforms, turbine towers for wind farms, submerged structures for oil and gas, those kinds of things. Originally, the two principal ocean industries were submarine telegraph cables and commercial fishing. Modern fiber optic cables are the successors to submarine telegraphs, which were first installed in the 1850s. But there's a lot more going on in the ocean environment than there used to be. So, as I mentioned, to install and maintain cables and minimize outage time, submarine cable operators need to do quite a bit of planning and coordination. They engage extensively in route planning and survey activities before the systems are ever built to minimize conflicts with other activities in the marine environment. With particular activities, if they're operating in different areas, submarine cable operators simply are not going to go there, whether it's an active anchorage or there really isn't developed deep sea mining yet, but if there were with mines, things like that. Munitions dumps, that's another great example of something to avoid a particular issue in the Pacific. Submarine cable operators, again, aren't going to go there. But again, they're seeking to maximize the chances of having unfettered access in the event of a repair, because repair activities, particularly for cables at great depths, are complicated in having to drag lines perpendicular to the cable to locate it, cut it, bring the ends to the surface, splice in a new section of cable at least 2.5 times the depth of water, and put it back down on the seafloor in a configuration known as a bight, but it's really a U shape sitting on the seafloor, because cables, if they're looped or piled on top of each other, protruding from the seabed, that subjects them to abrasion, and it can be a hazard for fishing nets, anchors, and it's something that submarine cable operators try to avoid at all costs, to have the cable sitting flat on the seafloor with the initial installation and following a repair. The repairs are done on board a ship, ultimately with those glass fibers that you see on the samples I've sent around the room. Those are spliced under a microscope on the ship, and everything is sealed up again and put back down on the seafloor. It is a major engineering exercise, both in terms of vessel operations and with the telecommunications fiber optic engineering as well. So I wanted to provide just a brief overview of some of the principal threats to submarine cables, because that's what is really driving the need to identify default rules for separation, and as we'll talk about in the second and third reports to be delivered in March, coordination and the other factors that we're looking at. Submarine cables are subject to diverse natural and man-made threats, and these vary considerably around the world depending on the natural environment and the political environment where they are installed. The more intensive use of U.S. offshore areas for resource development and infrastructure development has created a scarcity of unused and underused areas. And ultimately, this means that there's a greater risk of direct damage to installed submarine cables from equipment, anchors, other infrastructure, and resource exploitation activities. There's impaired access, because when things are crowded close to each other, it's hard to get one of those large cable ships in, operating on the surface, operating on the water column, conducting activity far below on the seafloor. And this can also distort routing and landing decisions. As you saw on that map, there's a lot of clustering of landings in Southern California, in Florida, in the New York, New Jersey area. Part of that has to do with where population centers are and where the ideal topography is on the seafloor. But that is also influenced by where other activities are, and also the permitting regimes, as some places are harder to land than others because of state and local governments. So the principal risk to undersea cables is commercial fishing, and this historically, globally, has accounted for more than 40% of fault incidents, fault being an industry term for damage to the system necessitating repair. This can be caused by bottom trawling gear, by nets, clam dredges, and also pot and trap fisheries. And it also affects, even on the shore, when installation activities can occur, depending on when crabbing season occurs, for example. So even on the beach, there are issues. Submarine cable operators have traditionally used routing, consultation with the commercial fishing industry extensively during the planning stage and during the operational stage. Liaison programs that compensate commercial fishermen for their gear if it's snagged on cables so they don't get into a tug of war with the cable and damage it. And these have been remarkably effective in reducing these risks in the United States. That is not the case globally, as any cable operator in the East or South China Sea would tell you. The second principal risk is from anchoring. Improperly stowed anchors, anchors that are dragged, anchors that are dropped outside approved anchorages, or in marine emergencies. And submarine cable operators try to route around designated anchorages, but some of these other situations, it's harder to address prospectively. Dredging and dumping. This certainly was a big issue again after Hurricane Sandy. There's a lot of sand and gravel dredging that occurs in the oceans off the coast of the United States. Both the act of gathering sand and gravel and then taking barges that are anchored on the seafloor and equipment used to pump that sand and gravel back on shore. And this is authorized by the Army Corps of Engineers either for its own dredging activities or in authorizing what state and local governments and their contractors do, and also involves the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And this activity, certainly if it's conducted directly over submarine cables, poses a direct threat, both in damaging them and unburying them. But it also disturbs seafloor sediments, so even in adjacent areas, it can change the seafloor environment. So what was previously a buried cable to avoid fishing risks is suddenly an exposed cable. Oil and gas development. Uncoordinated oil and gas exploration activities can pose some of the same direct physical disturbance issues. There are also complexities with pipeline and cable crossings and power cable, submarine cable crossings, and also challenges with impaired access to the seafloor. Historically, these industries have had an ongoing working relationship with submarine cable operators. There are standards that govern power cable and pipeline crossings, and there are model crossing agreements that are often used around the world for this, including off the coast of the United States. But certainly as technology changes and depending on what's happening with energy prices, there can be development in new areas where the operators aren't as sensitized to submarine cables, and the submarine cable operators aren't as used to having to worry about oil and gas. Clustering of cables. The closer you have cables together, if you have a repair event and you're trying to find one cable on the seafloor, that increases the risk that you're going to damage another one while you're conducting a repair. And so cable operators try to maintain minimum separation distances between submarine cables themselves. A few natural risks to address here: earthquakes and tsunamis. In the last couple of years, there have been earthquakes in Alaska that have posed challenges for the submarine cables operating up there. Certainly the Tohoku earthquake in Japan and the resulting tsunami damaged most of the submarine cables landing in Japan. Seafloor geology poses particular challenges. A lot of this can be addressed through routing. And weather. Weather is always a challenge because the repair events don't always occur during the best sea conditions. Just a couple more risks to address briefly here. An emerging risk and a challenge that we talked about a lot in our working group was offshore renewable energy development. There has been quite an interest both with energy prices for oil and gas and concerns about the impact on the environment in developing green energy sources from the oceans, whether that is offshore wind, wave tidal or ocean current projects, or marine or ocean thermal energy conversion. And these are industries that are typically not used to or really aware of submarine cables, and it is new for everybody and has certainly been creating some friction. I think one of the great outcomes of our working group is that we've established a dialogue between the industry, submarine cable industry, and the energy regulators on this that we would like to see continue. But again, this poses some of the same direct physical disturbance, impaired access issues. And finally, deep sea mining. This is something that has not, to date, been a big issue in the oceans off the coast of the United States, but with a continuing interest in rare earth minerals and sourcing them from places other than China, that could certainly change. Just a brief word about the U.S. legal regime before we get into protection methods and into recommendations. Submarine cable operators have some very unique rights and freedoms that are not granted to any other marine activity, whether that's energy or commercial fishing. The theory being that we want to promote connectivity internationally, and imposing barriers on that is not in anyone's security interests or economic interests. Consequently, there are also some cable protection treaties in existence, the foremost being the 1884 Cable Protection Convention, which requires signatory states, including the United States, to develop certain cable protection regimes and adopt penalties for damage. Unfortunately, the United States has not developed this further since initial laws were enacted after signing the 1884 convention, which became effective in 1888. So in this regard, we have a 19th century cable protection regime for 21st century infrastructure. The penalties for damage to submarine cables are tiny, and they aren't going to deter anybody from inflicting damage on them. So in terms of protection methods, this is a major undertaking for the industry. The International Cable Protection Committee at the international level, the North American Submarine Cable Association, for which I serve as counsel, and other national level entities, and I would note Subsea Cables UK, just because the offshore wind industry in the UK is much more advanced than it is in the United States, have devoted a lot of time and resources to developing cable protection standards, outreach, and awareness programs. They've developed some very specific standards, which I won't go into in any depth here, other than to note that they have promulgated some default rules about separation between cables themselves, one cable system versus another, and cables and other marine infrastructure and activities. And a lot of this is methodology-based. Submarine cable operators recognize that they don't own the seafloor, and they need to coordinate with other activities there. As the ocean environment becomes more crowded, there's all the more need for these activities. Unfortunately, some of this outward awareness and protection activity is not, other industries don't necessarily approach infrastructure the same way, which creates some of the friction. So one of the principal protection methods used in the industry is separation distances. And we have this even in other contexts with different U.S. government agencies where they observe either formally or informally separation distances just as a default rule, unless there's some particular agreement between the affected parties, in which case their activities can be closer together. The point is not necessarily to establish absolute no-go zones across the U.S. coasts, but to protect the infrastructure that's there and maximize coordination at the planning stages in the future. So both BOEM and the U.S. Coast Guard have done this. We would like certainly to see other agencies do this. In this regard, the United States is very much behind. A lot of other countries as diverse as China, Indonesia, Russia, Singapore, and the UK have established default or minimum separation distances for submarine cables and other infrastructure. Some countries have adopted cable protection zones. Australia and New Zealand are the best example of this. They have what the industry views as the most advanced cable protection regimes. And these zones prohibit fishing, anchoring, and dredging within fixed geographic areas. These are enforced with air and sea patrols over the zones and include severe penalties. Very different, certainly, than what we have in the United States. Corridors have long been controversial for the industry just because requiring cables be located only in particular corridors creates a clustering problem, so that if you have an earthquake or a tsunami, everything's clustered together, everything's damaged at once. If you have a ship dragging an anchor, it drags an anchor through all of the systems. It makes it harder to conduct repairs when things are clustered together. So cable protection zones are certainly viewed favorably. Mandatory corridors, definitely not. Legal penalties, as I mentioned, the United States has statutes on the books that have not been updated since the 19th century in terms of the penalty amounts. Other countries have more severe penalties. Sweden also takes the approach that if you damage it, you have to pay for the repair. The U.S. statutory penalties would not begin to cover the cost of a repair. Marine spatial planning, I won't go into in any depth other than to note that there hasn't been a lot of marine spatial planning in the United States, certainly not at the federal level. There is more of this that we're seeing at the regional level, and that is cataloged in one of the appendices to our report. The industry is committed to being involved in as much of that as possible. They don't always get word of those activities because sometimes those running those processes really are not aware of this industry. Other methods, which I've touched on already, cable fishing committees, crossing agreements, and cable awareness programs. So in terms of evaluating the current cable protection situation in the United States, our working group concluded that in absolute terms, the U.S. cable protection regime is inadequate, and it falls far short of what we see elsewhere around the world. For countries that don't function as global hubs for telecommunications and the internet nearly the way the United States does. The U.S. government has recognized submarine cables as critical infrastructure, but again, this doesn't seem to have been reflected in the cable protection regime that we have in the United States. There's still work to be done there. There has not been sufficient coordination among agencies at the federal level and at the federal, state, and local levels. They all play a role and can exacerbate risks if they're not aware of or educated about submarine cables and their spatial needs. The industry continues to pursue its self-help mechanisms, whether it's outreach with commercial fishermen or private agreements with oil and gas operators. But these mechanisms to date have not been pursued with respect to renewable energy projects, and there's concern about, with intensive oil and gas development, whether or not they're going to be sufficient going forward. So, to the recommendations. We have made 13 recommendations here, which I will touch on just briefly. The first is just the paramount need for early consultation so that submarine cable operators and other agencies and marine activities, those looking to build infrastructure or conduct other temporary activities in the marine environment, consult with each other about what they're doing. The second, multiple measures. None of the recommendations that we're making here for cable protection measures on its own is sufficient. And we view these not as an a la carte offering, but as a set of recommendations that are meant to work together. The third is a proposal for and a recommendation for exclusion zones around existing submarine cables, asking that the FCC recognize the spatial requirements, particularly for repair with existing cables, and note that where they traverse energy lease blocks and rights-of-way, that the FCC encourage the energy regulatory agencies to seek separation and not to authorize development within areas containing submarine cables. That's not a proposal to segregate entire lease blocks, for example, as regulated by BOEM. at the Department of the Interior, but areas within lease blocks. Again, we're not looking to block off vast sections of the ocean here, but recognize the particular and demonstrated needs of this industry. And again, the concept is to make people aware of the minimum spatial requirements and at the very least foster consultations before any construction or repair activity takes place. The fourth is a default separation distance between activities, and this can apply for prospective cables as well as for other infrastructure in the marine environment. This builds on existing industry standards. We have recommended that the FCC endorse a default separation distance of 500 meters in shallow waters and 2 times the depth of water in greater depths. And the reason, again, for the 2 times the depth of water is just because of the repair operations when you have to drag a line perpendicular to an installed undersea cable to find it and bring it to the surface. That operation requires a certain amount of maneuvering room on the seafloor and the water column and on the surface. And those factors have not changed for decades. Oftentimes we get questions in the submarine cable industry, well, can't you do things with ROVs? ROVs can be used in installation and repair activities only in shallow waters. They are really not designed, the technology doesn't exist to use them effectively for these kinds of activities at greater water depths. So also we're asking the FCC to encourage other federal, state, and local agencies to recognize these default separation distances. The fifth recommendation is that the FCC recognize existing industry recommendations as standards and best practices. A lot of work has already been done in these areas, and it doesn't require reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of expertise that has been devoted to this. That said, the FCC should be encouraging, and we recommend that the FCC encourage industry bodies to update existing recommendations to address changes in technology, to address new uses of the oceans. Things are not static in the marine environment. The FCC, and this is recommendation number 7, should encourage enhanced dissemination to the public of these standards. Historically, some of the ICPC standards, the International Cable Protection Committee standards, were not readily available on the ICPC website, for example. You actually had to contact ICPC. And we think it would be helpful that the FCC would continue to encourage ICPC and other bodies to disseminate these recommendations as widely as possible as part of their cable awareness programs. The 8th recommendation comes from discussions that the industry has had with energy regulators and others. ICPC styles its standards as recommendations, which some have claimed are therefore not authoritative or persuasive. And this terminology issue, as I think it is really not helpful for recognizing what are, in fact, best practices or standards by any other name. So perhaps the FCC could encourage the industry to think about how it could better style these best practices and standards. The 9th recommendation, ICPC now invites government members. It's not simply an industry body anymore, and other foreign government agencies have joined ICPC as members. And so we are recommending that the FCC explore whether it or another U.S. government agency should join ICPC as a member or could even act as an observer. ICPC disseminates quite a bit of information about submarine cable operations, technology, and the extent of installations, and it also functions as a useful forum for discussions about cable protection activities. Recommendation number 10 is a recommendation that the FCC encourage other federal agencies to take a standardized approach to route position lists. When a submarine cable system is installed, the installer will provide the cable owner with a route position list indicating where at the time of installation the cable was located. And that can shift a little bit over time depending on seabed and ocean conditions. But this data is shared in particular with the Navy and their Office of Seafloor Cable Protection. There's long been a disagreement among different federal agencies about whether or not this information should be shared more widely. The industry's preference is to share it more widely, but because some agencies don't like that to be shared more widely, the industry has hesitated. We always think it's advantageous to have actors in the marine environment have more detailed information about where these systems are. It is not possible to conceal submarine cable systems. That is not an effective means of cable protection, whether it's from natural risks or even a terrorist attack. Commercial fishermen, ships carrying anchors need to know where those cables are located. We think that there are other mesh networking technologies and resilience strategies that can be used to guard against any risks that might arise from public dissemination of that information. And that gets to recommendation number 11. A lot of submarine cable operators and large international carriers pursue mesh networking on their own to ensure that a system submarine cable system which they might own or which they might have capacity on, if it's damaged, that they are still going to be able to carry communications on a particular route without delay. And these kinds of strategies, we believe the FCC should continue to encourage carriers to pursue. They're not a cable protection method that stands alone by itself, but certainly they can supplement some of the other methods that we have recommended. The last two recommendations, number 12, is that, and recognizing that the FCC is an independent regulatory agency, cannot simply go and lobby Congress for new legislation. But there's a need to encourage discussion, we think, more broadly about the need for greater statutory penalties for cable damage because the existing penalties have not been updated in more than a century, and it's time to do that. The final recommendation is a very technical one, but it relates to a particular rule that the FCC has adopted, providing that a cable must be moved on the request of the Secretary of the Army. This is in the FCC's cable landing license rules. Given the status of submarine cables as critical infrastructure, we don't think that this presumption really reflects the current importance of submarine cables. And there needs to be a coordination if there's a need for infrastructure to be moved or to work around it. But this presumption, we think, is not helpful. It has been invoked, just to be clear, not for security reasons, but it's been invoked in connection with dredging projects, which beach replenishment is an important priority, but it's certainly something that needs to be balanced with the importance of submarine cables as well.
Can you give us a feel for how often this has been invoked? Does this happen a couple times a year? Did this happen once in the last decade?
It's rare, but it has happened post-Hurricane Sandy, both with the Suffolk County dredging project and with the beach replenishment in New Jersey.
Okay, great, thank you. You know, the Army is going to be playing the Navy in a football contest coming up here. Maybe we could put this on the table. Yeah.
So that, in sum, is Report 1. On the final slide, I just have an update about Reports 2 and 3, which we will be delivering in March. These are not nearly the labors that this first report was. There was a lot of stage setting and background that needed to be addressed here to address what is, one of the great challenges, awareness. A lot of people don't know what these cables are, and that's largely what Report 1 is trying to do, in addition to proposing some specific separation recommendations.
Thank you, Kent.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions or comments in the room?
I'd just like to again thank the group for work on a very important area. You can't be the world's best place for information services, products, markets, if you don't have global reach. And submarine cables are essential for that global reach. And we'll want to very much look at your recommendations and take every consideration in facilitating protection of that national resource and further improvement in our global reach.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions in the room? If not, I'm moving to the phone bridge. Any comments or questions from the bridge? Okay, hearing none, at this time we will submit this report and these recommendations for a vote. All of those in the room who support, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All of those opposed, please say nay. All right, moving to the phone bridge. All of those who support, please say aye.
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 Those who support, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All of those opposed, please say nay. All right, hearing none, we have approved this report and these recommendations. Thank you very much. I think now we're going to have a 9 to 10 minute health break, and we will meet back here and start in 10 minutes sharp. Thank you.
That's a good idea.
Okay, if everyone could please move towards their seats. Okay, we're going to move into the next report and a set of recommendations. Jay Nellen will begin Working Group 9, Infrastructure Sharing During Emergencies.
Thank you, Donna. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Nalen, and I'm the Director of National Ops Planning and Strategy for T-Mobile. And I'm also the Chair of Working Group 9, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chair of Working Group 9. But with me today, I have Cindy Perez, who's the CEO of CAT 5, also the co-chair of the Backup Power Subcommittee, and you'll be hearing from her in a little bit. All right, so I guess I have the presentation ready. All right, so I'll lead off the presentation today by providing some background concerning Working Group 9's objective. Our objectives, our approach to addressing those objectives. I'll discuss a little bit around the intangible wins that didn't necessarily make it into the recommendations, but were valuable just the same. Then I'll move into the Transport Subcommittee the findings and the recommendations, and then I'll turn it over to Cindy, and she'll take us through the Backup Power Subcommittee recommendations and findings. And then we'll come back together and do the questions and comments at that time. So a little bit of the background. So as I've mentioned in the past readouts, and as many of you are already aware, that during major disasters or major events, there's often commercial utility power and transport facilities that are significantly impacted. And so Working Group 9 was brought together to address those challenges. So Working Group 9 was tasked with investigating potential opportunities for sharing power and transport infrastructure during those emergencies. So the approach that we took, we first started off with forming the 3 subcommittees that you've heard from a little bit previously in previous readouts. We had the Backup Power Subcommittee, we had the Transport Facilities Subcommittee, and the Wireless Network Subcommittee. So over the last 15 months, Working Group 9 has conducted quite a bit, extensive research and investigation, and provided a lot of collaboration focused on the various subcommittee topics, such as the backup power, transport facilities, and the network. Over the time, so the subcommittee, they examined the different methods for sharing infrastructure, resources, and services during times of emergency. The subcommittee researched and reviewed existing best practices and did research on case studies that were available. We also conducted potential solution review forums where we brought subject matter experts into a location and did in-person reviews of potential solutions, whether it was microwaves or satellites or the various technologies that were available to us around the transport facilities space. We learned a lot through this process. I can tell you that although we didn't always agree unanimously on an idea, an approach, or a solution, from time to time we even, I was curious and I wondered if some of the passionate debate that did occur was going to drive us apart, that we may have permanently damaged relationships at the end of the day. But I think that's necessary, and it was necessary for us to do, to actually challenge the status quo and to make sure that we were asking the right questions and thinking about what else could we do. So with that, I'm happy to report that at the end of the day, we do have a good working relationship still, so there's no permanent damage. And I think it helped bring us together and establish a very strong working group and a community that I think is going to benefit us all as we go into the future and we look into potential solutions and working on these approaches to infrastructure sharing. So as I mentioned previously, I wanted to talk a little bit about the intangible wins. So of course there were the communication and collaboration improvements. The entire communications ecosystem collaborated well to investigate and develop the recommendations. The ecosystem consisted of the supply chain. We had public and private sectors that participated quite a bit. The establishment of Working Group 9 created an environment that opened new doors and existing doors and older doors reopened, of communications and teamwork across the private and public sectors and within all areas of the supply chain. We had incredible brainstorming of solutions and design criteria that yielded ideas and discussion from some of the brightest minds in the industry and in the field. And some of them can be found in the recommendations, but often the discussion and dialogue that occurred in those meetings is really future-looking as well, that may not have made it into the recommendations just because our inability to articulate it in the form of a recommendation, but it was still valuable just the same. The relationships that we have established over these last 15 months will really set the stage for us to continue these efforts, to continue working together. We're not sure what that cadence is yet, but we know that it's something that we've dedicated to do and we're committed to do as a community. And also knowing each other better and developing a working relationship over the past 15 months, it's going to allow us to operate much more functionally and streamlined efforts when we do or we are confronted with future emergency situations, hurricanes, storms, etc. So those are the intangibles. But I think what we wanted to talk about are the findings and the recommendations, so we'll move on to those. So I'll start with the transport. The transport subcommittee was co-chaired by Catherine Condello of CenturyLink and Joan Vaughn of T-Mobile. So as can be seen in the list on the left, the members of the subcommittee came from varying sectors, including experts from the financial sector, such as the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Bank of New York, Goldman Sachs, all of who depend upon these facilities for their critical financial transactions. The subcommittee was also supported by cable companies, local exchange carriers, wireless network providers, tower companies, vendor manufacturers, and industry representatives, and local and public, state, federal agencies. So the Transport Subcommittee, we were challenged to assess various methods to acquire or share transport infrastructure in the aftermath of a major event to compensate for the loss of transport assets. So the subcommittee's process, so it involved reviewing the best practices for wireline, wireless, and cable infrastructure regarding resiliency. The investigating possible alternatives for shared transport options to address the last mile challenges. And the last mile is that section of the transport that reaches a home or that reaches the cell site. So it's not between inner offices, it's the last portion. And then investigating opportunities for sharing high-capacity backhaul infrastructure. So our transport findings. So the Transport Subcommittee found that the case studies reviewed identified that infrastructure sharing on the fly or immediately following or during an event does not lend itself well between providers. The recommendation document does outline the case studies that we reviewed and provides more details around the whys and hows and what was involved with those particular incidents that were investigated and used as case studies. But in most cases, in each case, in fact, in these case studies that were presented, it took more time to actually facilitate or to plan, design, construct, provision, and then integrate new facilities or reroute existing facilities from one operator to another or one network provider to another than it did to repair the damaged facility. However, if pre-planning, the design, construction, provisioning were completed prior to an event, then the time to reroute could be dramatically reduced. We also found that satellite and microwave technologies could also potentially be installed within days and weeks in some cases, depending upon the capacity and the length of the transport. The subcommittee also found that most transport challenges occur in the last mile that I described previously, which doesn't lend itself well to sharing facilities. And the reason that is there's not a lot of geo-redundancy going to those end facilities for that last mile, whether they're available or the geo-redundancy is actually an option. So to share a facility that would be damaged, it would most likely be damaged by all that were at that same location. So the committee also validated the importance for customers with critical business needs to assess TSP options, and that was another study that was performed during our investigation. All right, so moving on to our transport recommendations. So the transport subcommittee found that at this time there are no practical solutions for provisioning transport services on the fly, but there are opportunities to leverage existing technologies such as satellite, microwave, and a few others, in some cases, that could be established quicker than the time it would take to repair the impacted facilities. The subcommittee endorses the recommendations previously made by the Network Reliability Steering Committee, specifically customers purchasing protected or unprotected light paths, circuits, or other transport services should consider reviewing the ADIS Network Diversity Assurance Initiative report regarding bilateral contractual arrangements to manage diversity for critical services. The subcommittee also recommends that the FCC continue to support outreach efforts to the Federal Communications outreach efforts along with the Department of Homeland Security to build awareness of the TSP program. For the prioritized restoration afforded by this program may meet some end-user needs. It was pretty enlightening to us as the subcommittee or the transport subcommittee when we did the investigation on TSP and how many service providers and circuits are actually utilizing TSP. There's a great opportunity there, and I think that's an area that we want to continue to support.
Let me ask you a question about that. We get the mic on? Well, I'll just ask the question. Sure. As I meet with emergency communication providers around the country, when I bring up TSP, quite often I get from state, but even more so local municipalities, is that there's a lot of skepticism about their investment about an investment from local communities in TSP because they feel like the federal government will just come in and trump anything that they would get from TSP. So I think that's something that if your recommendation is to better utilize TSP to ensure that we've got for organizations that really need to have this backup capability after a large disaster, some work done by the industry with local communities to better understand their perceived barriers to utilization of TSP so that we might come up with a targeted barrier reduction so that communities would see TSP as a more attractive prior planning tool. Right.
So agreed. Just back on. Okay. So we did find that at first there were some of us that were also skeptical. When we did the investigations, we did find that the TSP did provide value and provide in as far as prioritized restored services. And so it was building our education, awareness, and we all are in support of it at this time from a subcommittee recommendation. So I know that there is value in building education and pushing visibility and awareness out to the community, we believe that it would actually provide a lot of value and benefit. So, I definitely support that. If we can help provide information details, we definitely have the information I believe is in the recommendation documentation that shows the percentage of TSP circuits that are being used today and how we address that. If that could be used for educational purposes, I think that would be definitely.
I think partnering up with APCO or NINA and asking them to survey their members, what are the barriers? Why is there such a low utilization of TSP once you get below the state level?
Right.
Might be a place for industry to start. We'd be happy at the FCC then once we have a better understanding of what their barriers are and your recommendations on how to reduce those barriers to more broadly publicize TSP as a tool for communities to do risk management planning.
Great. Yeah, we can gather some of that. And then the subcommittee recommends that the FCC coordinate with DHS to develop messaging appropriate for DHS sector outreach program, emphasizing the importance of communicating the criticality or business continuity objectives of critical infrastructure key resource owner operators to their network or service providers. Meaning, we also found through our investigations that a service provider or a owner-operator may have had intentions in their own plan and understanding what they wanted at the end of the day, but didn't effectively communicate that or those plans completely. And so the design around whether it was redundancy, additional capacity, or whatever it may have been to build to that level of resiliency may not have been met. So the recommendation is really to encourage that dialogue, the communication, and the education around that so that those folks ordering those services can communicate their resiliency plans and expectations.
Yes. So in that regard, I think TSP right now, the way it's set up, has a like-for-like prioritization. In other words, if what you've bought is a cable circuit or a wireline circuit, that you get priority among other wireline customers or among other cable providers, if that's the case, or cable customers. It seems, though, from your recommendation that there's a lot of value in exploring a hybrid approach that would not necessarily have a like-for-like restoral capability. That if you have wireline go down and your concern as a community is getting phone service back up, it might be that a satellite
or an
alternative is the best practical rapid restoration. And should we explore TSP offerings that expand the concept of TSP to, instead of like-for-like media, like-for-like functionality?
It's a great question, and I think it was something that we would need to take another look at, because there's the service provider repairing the service, or if you have a service that has TSP on it that goes down, whether it's a DS3 or a gig circuit or an Ethernet circuit, may be provided by service provider A, may not have the microwave or the satellite provider or the service to replace that transport. I mean, so that's why the like-for-like was working. So I guess I would seek additional clarification around. So is it a partnership between the community when TSP is offered, that if TSP is requested through or requested provision from a particular service provider, that they would be responsible for acquiring alternate means, whether it be satellite, microwave, or other methods, or would it?
Yeah, so I think of it as a way insurance, right? So if the community said, look, rapid restoral of voice communications to these anchor institutions in my community is important. I'd be willing to pay a premium for TSP
if, in fact, from my wireline provider, that TSP could credibly offer within a day Iridium phone terminals at each of those anchor institutions, that my annual payment of TSP would help subsidize.
Okay. No,
something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a worthy discussion. It's something we could definitely approach the committee again with and talk about those options and what that might look like, for sure.
Okay. Steve or others that are closer to the local problem, any comment or thoughts upon why TSP isn't regularly used, why it's looked at as a cost without a sufficient benefit by many communities?
I certainly can't speak for the region nor my colleagues around the country, but I've been in many conversations where the point that you made earlier about that there is a feeling that when there was a real need, that maybe the federal government would preempt that need, regardless of what the conditions of the service and the contract and the expectations were, if you will. I might add, and to Donna's comments, one of the outgrowths of the derecho storm, and you'll all remember that of a couple of years ago, was that there were no telephone service, none, zip, if you will. So TSP would not even be an alternative at that time. But since that time, we have, working with a firm out of Utah, have subscribed to 50 satellite lines, which are available 24/7 currently. But they're always kind of a yet another backup should we be absolutely dead in the water as we were back in June of 2012. So there is, I think that approach is gaining a little bit of favor as well. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I think that's a good example of if we brought a little bit of imagination to TSP, and with the goal of making it a more attractive, credible option for communities to participate in, that may have win-win value, not just for communities, but for the industry as well, who really wants to be perceived as responsive and success-oriented in getting communications back online in a prioritized way for the most important aspects of a community's needs.
Got it.
Somewhat of a fervent supporter of TSP in aggregate. Yeah, yay, rah. Especially since, as you're saying, it's a relatively low take rate. I mean, I think a couple of key things that I'd highlight, one sort of operational tactical, and the other one's there is, let's be realistic, and this has come up in some of the working group discussions, one of the largest consumers of TSP are actually wireless carriers. Right, between each other, because they recognize the value associated with this. And here's the key reason why there's value is, and again, I understand that they're multi-tiers, 1 through 4, federal takes preemption, et cetera, from those circumstances. But when you get down into it, in the OSS, BSS systems that carriers have for being able to sit there and prioritize tickets, TSP automatically drops to the top of the list. So if you think about a lineman out there trying to pull the next ticket to be able to do, automatically it goes into those systems. So that's what I'm saying is, like, you really start thinking about it, that if there's a broader adoption across critical infrastructure, that's going to start coming into play to be able to try doing that. And it makes it easier for our technicians to make those priority calls, as opposed to if a hospital or if a XYZ location doesn't elect to do TSP. Instead, we're dealing with customer care centers doing sort of these prioritization manual overloads to say, no, listen, you need to drop this one higher on the list because it is a hospital. We can't read folks' minds sometimes, right? And that's where I think TSP could come into play to be able to help communities more effectively. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. It's very helpful.
All right, so that brings me to the end of the transport recommendations. I'm going to invite Cindy Perez up to take us through the backup power recommendations, and I'll rejoin her and do the vote at that time. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Perez. I'm the CEO of Cat 5 Resources and the Backup Power Subcommittee co-chair. First, I'd like to thank all of our very passionate participants in this group. We made huge strides and progress with the work that we have done. The backup power subcommittee was challenged with identifying approaches and recommendations to share backup power resources that would enhance the reliability of the nation's critical infrastructure. The subcommittee was divided into 4 focus groups because we had such a huge undertaking. On the slide that you see up, we have detailed everything out. The groups are referenced with the corresponding section numbers for the document, the detailed report. Section 3, the site selection and prioritization focus group, which identified methods of prioritizing sites for recovery and shared generator opportunities. Section 4, the regulatory practice focus group, which identified regulatory requirements and associated potential implications for generator deployments. Section 5, which is the technical requirements focus group, who identified potential opportunities for sharing generators and addressing design implications. Section 6, the portable generator and fuel sharing focus group, that reviewed best practices and investigated potential opportunities for sharing logistical resources such as fuel, generators, and equipment and labor resources. The backup power recommendation number 1 is that the subcommittee recommends that the FCC work with appropriate local, state, and federal regulators to explore alternatives to lighten regulations regarding mobile or permanent generators that would be used to provide backup power to communication facilities during times of emergency. Next slide.
So I'm not sure I understand the connection. If we're wanting to improve the resiliency of our networks, lightening regulations that doesn't automatically equate to improved resiliency. So what's the connection? Are we over-regulating in some areas and under-regulating in others, or across the board? If we just said, "Hey, y'all have it figured out, be resilient," that's the right approach.
I think whenever we go through the next few slides, you'll see there are quite a few regulations around fuel sources at the towers. The carriers go through a enormous effort to install generators at a site, and some sites have 0 generators, some sites have 4 or 5 generators. You look at the setback requirements for propane systems. If a site has you have to use propane at this location, you get setbacks of 10 feet per the NFPA. You're not putting 4 generators in that site unless you increase the size of the site fourfold.
Okay, so I think I understand. It's not just the FCC's regulation.
Right, exactly.
It's across the panoply
yes, sir.
of agencies that are out there to help you, to help us.
Yes, sir.
We perhaps have created requirements that really get in the way of an efficient and effective provision of backup power in these areas, and some reconciling amongst ourselves of those regulations would have great value in improving the ability of the industry to efficiently and effectively provide backup powers to areas that you'd like to provide backup power.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think
absolutely.
I got it.
Yes, sir. All right. Recommendation number 2. The subcommittee recommends that the FCC share the WG9 backup power recommendations document with the National Institute of Standards and Technology and other working groups engaged in similar work, such as the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. We found during our 15-month work that we received quite a few questions from other groups regarding the same work. I went and talked to the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force and gave them a short presentation on what we were trying to accomplish, because they were trying to accomplish the same work. So the next slide, I wanted to go into a little bit of research about what we did to look into all of the different aspects of backup power. To get a better understanding of the current generator deployments, we gathered information from 600 random tower locations across the U.S. 600 sites had 1,558 carriers located at those sites. There were 894 generators present at these 600 random tower locations for an average of 2.5 carriers and 1.5 generators per tower location. Now let me clarify that because the numbers seem a little strange. Not every site had a generator. Some sites had 2 generators, some sites had 4 generators. Some sites had 1 carrier, some had 5 carriers. Based upon the sampling, there is a probability that 2 or more carriers could potentially come together in the spirit of cooperation to create an efficiency with shared resources. The work product of the Backup Power Subcommittee always began with the end result in mind, and that is a solution for resiliency during major power outages.
With that in mind, our regulations now require backup power in certain nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that we should do, could do, to ensure that there are backup power credits, right? That if there's 2.5 carriers per site, let's just say there's 3 carriers in a site, if one carrier agrees to provide the backup power for the other 2, that they would get a credit that could be applied in another site where they wouldn't have to provide backup power because somebody else is providing backup power for them in that area. Would a regulatory mechanism of credits like that be helpful, desirable?
I'll let Jay answer some of it if he would like, but I think it would be very helpful and beneficial to provide those credits. We've looked at the carriers, looking at the co-located sites they're currently at, the tower owners looking at providing the backup power to the carriers that are located there. If you have an existing generator, why not share it with whoever else is at the site? There's a lot of work that goes into that, but I think a credit for doing that would be welcomed by the carriers.
Yeah, and Jeff reminds me that the backup rules for wireless are different from the other subsectors, but we would like ideas on how we might provide an incentive, an appropriate incentive for that kind of sharing that you're describing here.
Okay. I'm going to defer back to the carriers.
You don't need to answer now.
Yeah,
it's something
no.
I just like you to maybe take back with the group and ask them to think about.
Yeah, we'll take back to the carriers. Okay, the next slide, Section 3. I'm going to give you a little bit of history on each of the working groups, the focus groups. The Site Priority and Selection Focus Group looked into designing a system for priority and selection of sites housing multiple carriers that could tie into a landlord provisioned, and I believe this is what you're referring to, landlord provisioned or shared third-party fixed backup power generator. They first identified coverage sites and then critical server sites as a starting point to begin prioritizing locations that would need backup power. Then the group looked at markets with the most risk of natural disasters and those with the least reliable electrical power grid and classified them as high-risk markets. Third, they looked at a shared resource deployment model that property managers could implement for backup generators and existing carriers as well as new carriers at the site. Last, they discussed options under a non-disclosure agreement to review and share generator opportunities for locations where they are currently co-located. Next slide. Section 4, the Regulatory Practices Focus Group established a list of existing backup power equipment regulations to help expedite approval from state and federal regulatory agencies, zoning boards, building codes, and fire departments for deployment of equipment during an emergency situation. They also looked at opportunities for utilization of one fuel source at a site, which could enhance the opportunities for sharing resources during an emergency. going to go back real quick. Section 5, Technical Requirements for Backup Power Sharing. The Technical Requirements for Backup Power Sharing Focus Group developed a framework for how stationary and portable shared standby power resources could be accomplished from an engineering, installation, and maintenance practice perspective. These included multiple plug and cord interfaces for portable generators, service-sized versus actual load of a generator to accommodate multiple carriers, fuel reserve requirements, and possible site access restrictions. Next slide. Section 6. The Portable Generator and Fuel Sharing Focus Group identified the possibilities for sharing portable resources, asset transportation, access to fuel, refueling drivers, and common staging locations. First, we discussed we have began discussions for holding a yearly national or regional meeting with carriers to discuss shared backup power opportunities, such as shared generators, the portables, the staging yards. Next, the pre-planning sessions with refueling companies to discuss sharing resources, which would include post-disaster coordination for sharing any remaining refueling resources. Third, collaborate in establishing liaisons with emergency management recovery operations as part of the process. Last, coordinate with emergency management, the government emergency management, in developing and exercising disaster recovery plans that include power resources. When we were looking at the sharing of resources, we investigated the RMAG system with the electric co-ops to see what they had done and how we could establish the similar sharing opportunities. In summary, the foundation of our group, the CSRIC Working Group 9 Backup Power Subcommittee, was divided into 4 focus groups. The end goal was to provide recommendations that would increase the resiliency and reliability of the telecommunications infrastructure. The output we developed through the combined effort of a multi-stakeholder community involving industry as well as public sector representatives and agencies. The collaboration and efforts of this multi-state community has provided substantive material for consideration. The recommendations: FCC to work with the federal, state, and local regulators to explore options to lighten regulations regarding permanent and mobile generator deployments. FCC to share the output of this document with NIST and other similar working groups who are working towards a common goal of infrastructure and resiliency. Thank you. And I'd like to get Jay to come back up for questions if y'all have any.
All right. So thank you, Cindy and Jay. Are there additional questions or comments in the room?
Just one thing for both Cindy and Jay. I really appreciate your inclusion of the intangible wins, because that's very important in creating an enduring mechanism for the industry to come together around this. I think will be a huge win. I'd ask you in that to maybe give us some feedback as to how we might best engage with that particular enduring win element. One area that it strikes me is DERS, that I don't think DERS right now really has a field or fields that would allow carriers to say, hey, I've got some extra power capacity, or I've got fuel resources, or and another area, in addition to DERS, would be our better coordination with our ops centers, because our ops centers between FEMA, DHS, and ourselves regularly collaborate right after a major disaster like that on, what are the what should priorities be in restoral, and what are the barriers to restoral, and how many resources should be applied to which of those barriers. Are there, as you improve the communication and collaboration among the industry players, is there a better way for us in the moment
to tap into that as we're collaborating across our government partners when the disasters happen.
So I think what we've actually discussed that. How do we better engage the governmental agencies and entities to help leverage and help share that communication? And it's really there's a couple forums that we thought that we'd like to move forward with and pursue further, and that's the NCC is definitely set up to do that today, and just to help reemphasize that and reengage that effort to pull people together. It's also, there are industry forums today that are looking at DERS, ways to improve DERS, like ADIS is one that was part of our sub-team as well, that we're definitely looking to carry some of the message forward with us as well. So I think there's still other opportunities we probably need to consider. We could definitely go back and solicit again. What else is next, and I'd be happy to do that.
Thanks, Jay.
Any other questions or comments from the room? If not, let's move to the phone. Any questions or comments on the phone?
Nope.
Okay, hearing none, I am going to take both the transport and the backup power recommendations as a whole, unless anyone has a challenge with that. If not, I submit this report and these recommendations to the group. Those in the room, if you could please say aye if you support.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. All right, moving to the bridge. Those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. With that, we have approved this report and these recommendations. Thank you. This concludes the three items that we'll be voting on today. Next, we will move to the progress report from the active working groups. I noticed that working group 1 is listed on the agenda, but they have completed their work, so we will move next to the working group 3 on emergency alert system. I think that Larry Walk is on the phone. Larry?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Go
okay.
ahead.
Thank you. This should be a pretty brief status update. Next slide, please. Yes, Working Group 3, we've been addressing various issues related to the emergency alert system. Back in March, we submitted a final report about state EAS plans and made some recommendations for improving and changing that process. And then in back in June, we submitted 2 reports, one on issues that arose out of the nationwide EAS test and a variety of other issues that were posed by the FCC. Also in June, our subcommittee on EAS security submitted an initial report that recommended actions to promote and improve the security of the emergency alert system. Next slide, please. We have, I think, about 43 members. For our task going forward, we informally enlisted a couple of others with some expertise that could help us. You could skip 2 slides, please. One more. Right. Like I said, our working group subcommittee on EAS security, we've replaced our chairs of that subcommittee. The previous task focused on cybersecurity and cyber hygiene measures, so we had some experts in that field. And going forward, myself and Gary Smith from Cherry Creek Radio have taken the reins of this subcommittee. As I mentioned, back in June, we submitted an initial report. That report addressed the needs for security controls throughout the EAS system with a focus on recommending best practices for cybersecurity mitigation steps for the emergency alert system. we came up with recommendations and divided them among the various actors in the EAS ecosystem, including EAS participants, which includes radio and TV stations and cable operators and satellite TV and so on, the public safety, local, state, regional, and federal managers who issue EAS alerts, and as well as the EAS device manufacturers. Next slide, please. Originally, we were asked to submit a final report in December, today, that would basically provide recommendations for applying the NIST cybersecurity framework within the context of the emergency alert system. But after conversations with the FCC, we all agreed that we kind of needed to take a first things first approach. Our recommendations that we submitted in June were fairly comprehensive, while at the same time being fairly simple and easy for EAS participants and everyone else to implement and understand and implement. So going forward, we decided to take a different approach, kind of step back from policy, and focus more on submitting a report that would make recommendations to the FCC on ways to promote and facilitate awareness of those best practices in our June report. Next slide, please. The goal, of course, being that you can make all the recommendations you want, but if nobody knows about them, then they're only as good as they are on paper. So what we've done is sort of reformatted our subcommittee and our working group and focused our efforts on coming up with a proposed plan for outreach and making the EAS participant community aware of the risks of cybersecurity attacks and best practices to mitigate those risks. We've been asked to try to pay special attention to the many smaller sized entities out there. There's small mom and pop radio stations and many very small cable TV operators who are very important to public awareness during emergencies, and also provide live programming, live news that should not be interrupted or disrupted by cyber attacks. So that's where we are. We are in the process now of basically working up a plan or proposed plan that would involve recommendations for things the FCC itself should consider doing to facilitate and improve awareness of these best practices and cyber security risks generally to the broad swath of EAS participants. And we're also going to be making recommendations for how industry can support and complement the FCC's efforts to promote awareness and outreach and information as widely as possible. And we'll be submitting that final report in March. We think that it's very important to kind of nail down some outreach initiatives. We think it will dovetail nicely with Working Group 4's efforts because, of course, a lot of the recommendations we make regarding EAS cybersecurity most likely should be relevant to their efforts regarding cybersecurity and the NIST framework in general. So that's all I have today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments?
Larry, thank you for the update. This is very timely and relevant since we last met as a CSRIC group. There was a fairly significant unauthorized emergency alert transmission, but of greater concern to me, there was a retransmission of that unauthorized alert. and that is representative of the vulnerability that we have in the commercial part of the EAS system. So it's very important. And while you outlined the FCC's goal as one of awareness, that really is not my goal. My goal is to reduce the vulnerability here. And if you all feel that awareness is an important element of reducing the vulnerability, great. I'm very much in support of that. But we've got to reduce the vulnerability of our EAS commercial infrastructure to cyber exploitation and or attack.
Well, yes, they definitely go hand in hand. It's, as you know, it can be very difficult to plug every hole. But, one important aspect of it is to at least make as many EAS participants aware of some of the basic, essential steps they can take. That would go a long way towards containing problems and preventing problems.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Larry.
Thanks. Are there any questions or comments on the bridge? All right. Thank you for that report. Next, we'll hear the progress report from Working Group 4, Cybersecurity Risk Management, from Robert Mayer.
Good afternoon, and thank you. And I noticed that I have 14 minutes, and there's still another speaker, so I won't be offended if people walk out in the middle of the presentation. I want to thank the Admiral and the staff again and the Council for this opportunity to update you on the activities of Working Group 4, and I will try to be as efficient and quick in this as possible. So what we'll talk about today a little bit is some of the goals and objectives, but I'd like to put that in the context of the historical activities that facilitated this effort and why it's significant. Talk a little bit about the organization, the approach, the timeline, where we currently are, and what the next steps are. With respect to the goals and objectives, I think there were a number of kind of fortuitous events, some synchronicity at play here in terms of how we got to Working Group 4 as a new construct, and it was aligned with the activities that were happening in redefining national cybersecurity policy that started with the presidential executive order on February 2013, 13636, which really was a seminal and foundational piece of policy that laid the groundwork for a risk management approach at the enterprise and sector level. That included some directions to NIST in particular to develop a voluntary framework. They had a one-year timeline to develop that. That was a collaborative effort involving many participants in our sector and in other sectors. And in February of this year, the NIST cybersecurity framework was released. So we're really in month 10 of a major shift and some groundbreaking work in terms of risk management that could be applied across critical infrastructure sectors and industry writ large in the United States. The FCC and industry agreed that it made sense to use the NIST cybersecurity framework as the foundation for looking at sector risk management best practices, which we have done. And part of our objectives are to provide some kind of indicators and assurances. They're still being developed and defined, but essentially they came in three major categories. One was that they were tailored to individual companies to suit their unique needs and characteristics and risks, which is consistent with the framework. That there were some basis for measuring indicators of success over time with respect to cyber risk management, and that there were some assurances around having meaningful communications among internal and external stakeholders. In addition, part of the work that we're doing is looking at the challenges. We call them barriers, but what are the issues associated with implementing, adopting, using the framework across industry, and how do they vary by enterprise? And then finally, we're on schedule to deliver an interim report in mid-January and a final report in March. I think the fact that we have 114 people, the number continues to grow a little bit, but we continue to adjust for bringing in particular expertise and perspective. We have several folks at the table here who are part of the leadership of the team. Donna leads the satellite segment. Matt leads, Thule leads the cable segment. We organized our efforts around 5 segments within the sector, consistent with how the sector is organized as part of the Communication Sector Coordinating Council and our government partners in the Government Communications Coordinating Sector. So we have participants from broadcast, cable, wireless, wireline, and satellite. To support the efforts of those segments, we created 5 feeder group initiatives. One I mentioned around requirements and barriers, a particular initiative that is focusing on small and medium-sized businesses and their issues related to using the framework, cyber threat and vectors, how that impacts risk management, the ecosystem in terms of understanding what the framework describes as interdependent stakeholders, how we operate in an environment of shared responsibilities, and finally, a group that was added this summer, which is looking at the measurement component, which is one of the objectives. Real quickly here, I think the foundational question that we've teed up is, through this work, how can we help companies in our 5 segments contribute to their capacity to assure appropriate internal and external stakeholders of the sufficiency of their own cybersecurity risk management practices? And that continues to be a guiding compass for us in terms of working to provide real guidance, especially for companies who may not have as much maturity in the area of risk management. Many of the companies in our sector are really part of the solution around cybersecurity and, in fact, offer services to the most demanding enterprises and government agencies on the planet. So they really have very sophisticated capabilities in risk management, but as in any industry, capabilities vary, and we are looking at opportunities for companies that may not be at that highest level of risk management capabilities to help them and provide some guidance there. So this quickly is the structure and the timeline. The effort was divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 was the segment and feeder development, the analysis, and I'll show you some samples of that shortly. Phase 2 is the integration and analysis effort, where the feeder groups and the segment groups start having conversations about how information developed at the feeder group level informs the segments in terms of what they can do, in terms of advising companies as to priorities, barriers, cost-benefit kind of considerations, that kind of activity. And we're about to complete phase 2, and we're now moving into the drafting and the feedback process. As structured as the effort is, it's very fluid. It's been evolving in a contextual basis. Things are changing constantly. There's new threat information. There's also activities that are happening in the context of work that NIST is doing. So since my last presentation, NIST has issued an RFI asking for input on awareness and use of the framework. It was followed by an event in October in Tampa, a workshop for several days on the framework. Participants included folks from the FCC, government stakeholders, and industry, and I expect that NIST will be producing something shortly that sums up where they were in terms of the information they received from the RFI, what changes or adjustments they might be considering, and input from the workshop itself. Again, I'm sorry, Donna, go ahead. If I misstated anything, please let me know. Is it Donna?
I think it sounded like Donna.
Donna, were you trying to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to verify that, yes, we will have something out shortly. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, that was my way of nudging you, Donna. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Robert, while we have Donna on the line, I note that NIST just recently published that threat intelligence
framework, and is that being used by your threat intelligence subgroup, or is that something that, we've got enough work with just the risk management framework to also look at that? I'm just curious to know whether or not that product is adding value now, or if that's something that you'll look at perhaps in CSRIC 5.
I think, in all honesty, it's probably a prospective activity looking forward, because the comments were just submitted last week from participants on that. I know that associations and companies and our council submitted comments, so it's not that we would ignore it, because I think there's some good information. I think information sharing and threat intelligence is part of the fabric of the framework. There may be some more specificity or suggestions in there, but I think to say that we've fully integrated it into the report would probably be an overstatement.
Great. Yeah,
and
thank you.
That's the document that we put out in and of itself is not a fulsome framework to support all of the aspects of information sharing as well. So we know from the NIST side we have more work to do.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Donna. And I think it might be worth, if we had a offline NIST and FCC, really an education session for us in understanding your goals for the threat intelligence piece, because we'll certainly want to be supportive of that and understand how we might best leverage the good work that's going on there in our areas of our responsibility.
Happy to do so, and sorry that I'm not there in person today.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Let's see if I can go back to the slides here on the video. There we go. Let me just go back here. So this just confirms the timeline, and I just want to share with you so you have some suspense and excitement about what it is that we're going to be producing here in March.
Do we need more excitement?
Well, this is the right kind of excitement, I think. We don't, certain kind of excitement that we don't need. You're right. So anyway, we were very careful when we asked folks to come on board here, and they've been very generous with their time and input. So even though it's the 5 communication segments that are looking at the framework in terms of adapting it for risk management, we've embraced participation from other sectors, including the energy sector. We have financial sector involvement. We have IT sector involvement. We have equipment providers involved in this. We really have a cross-section of input from the ecosystem participants, and that's been particularly helpful in validating our understanding of who the players are, how they are characterized, and in the context of a lot of today's focus on the Internet generally and Internet protocols, we've looked at what's commonly called the Internet stack, and folks who have more of an engineering background than I do, understanding where these players are in terms of offering capabilities around the various stacks, and then most importantly, looking at some of the dominant threats that we're facing right now and the vectors that they come in through that could affect the ecosystem. And this analysis, I think, is going to be very current and important as we go forward, staking out how to go about collaborating on cybersecurity in future activities. The other thing, and I know this is not something that's easily read, it's not really intended to, but I will tell you that, to talk about the kinds of iterations that we've gone through, we started the group with the focus on barriers, and I think we, at a certain point, collectively realized that we really needed to do some real homework, and that before we would talk in generalities about barriers to implementation, we needed to have a real grasp of the framework and all of its components, including all of the categories and subcategories, and ask ourselves, what are the operational requirements from a people, process, technology perspective associated with that particular risk management activity? It's only then that we really could with confidence, talk about barriers. Over time, I think we'll have to have conversations about incentives. A lot of these activities are intensive in terms of human resources and capital. And, you can always spend more money, but that's not always the answer. Sometimes it's just doing things differently, being more efficient, sharing best practices and information. So we've really gotten into a good amount of detail around how somebody would operationalize a particular risk management activity. And then just another example, and this is really some of the excellent work that I credit Susan Joseph from Cable Labs and Jesse Ward with NTCA for leading, and that is a pretty substantial effort around small and medium business considerations as they affect each of the 5 segments. And again, in the spirit of wanting to provide guidance to readers of this document and folks who will pick this up and hopefully use it and embrace it, they're developing a resource capability to help these organizations in a very targeted way look for meaningful information, everything from prior NIST materials to information that's been developed here at the FCC on small, medium businesses to some of the security offerings that are provided to these organizations. It's really to help them help themselves or to help them seek guidance in terms of how they can go about making their enterprises more secure. From a project management perspective, in terms of where we are as we're entering the drafting process, we're looking right now at 10 independent reports, 5 segments, 5 feeder groups. We're going to be meeting on Monday to have the first conversation about what the findings of these reports are and how these findings lead to assurances, recommendations. We have to crystallize that. We have to get the right input from the full group and vet that throughout the sector and with other stakeholders, and that's happening in a very organized and structured way since there are other people who are much more organized and structured than me who can help with that. Working Group 4 status, there are a lot of calls that are happening and meetings, bi-weekly meetings with the leadership team. There are 20 people on the leadership team and the full working group. We've had 5 face-to-face meetings. We will have had 5 face-to-face meetings as of Monday. The segment team leaders and feeder group teams regularly report out to the leadership on their progress and any obstacles, and when they need additional resources or assistance, we're able to move and shift or bring some new people in. And we're on track, as I said, to deliver to the January 15th interim report. As long as a few people don't mind sacrificing their families and their holidays, we'll be in good shape. And then next steps, I think, is just a continuation of the progress we're making and trying to get this thing wrapped up by March and hopefully making substantial progress on the part of the sector with regard to risk management. With that, I'll certainly welcome any questions.
Questions or comments from the room? Questions?
Larry, just thanks very much for the hard work of the entire group here. As you know, it's a very important topic for us, and we're watching with great interest your activity.
I didn't know it was important to you, but just...
and if I need to provide any more enthusiasm, please just let me know. You can email me anytime.
I just hope to walk out of here in one piece in March, sir.
You were going to ask about the...
Any comments or questions from the bridge? Thanks for that report, Robert, and thanks for delivering it in such a speedy fashion. So I'm going to move next to our final report from Working Group 7, Legacy Best Practice Updates. Robin?
Okay, thank you. This is Robin Howard. I'll be representing Kyle Milady today. So if I could like to go to slide 3 to start off, please. We, as Working Group 7, have completed 2 of our 3 charter items. Our most recent was September 2014 with our final report. We're working on our final March 2015 deliverable, which is looking at revisions to the best practice prioritization based on work that was done in CSRIC 2 by Working Group 6. Slide 4, please. We have a very small team compared to a lot of the folks that we've seen today, but a very broad knowledge base here, and we've been getting a lot of good participation and effort in this final stage. Moving on to slide 5. Our current status is we've started looking at the 3 prioritizations of critical, highly important, and important, which were again created back in CSRIC 2. What we're trying to do at this point, there's a lot of debate going on in our team, and we're actually assessing the real true purpose and usefulness of the status and priority rankings. There's debate going on about prioritization, and does it lead to a tendency to devalue some of the lower ranked best practices like highly important and important versus critical? Do the existing keyword searches that are available on best practices, where you can pull your best practices based on what you do, what your particular function is in your company, does the prioritization become duplicative? Does it become less of an issue? And again, it's just some talk and debate just to make sure we do the best job we can. And then the third part was, do service providers and vendors actually find value in these new prioritizations? And we find that there's a mixed bag there. We've got some that say they're very valuable. There's some discussion that we've had related to new startup companies that might need to start off with that solid set of best practices as far as budgetary concerns and how they apply those and then start working their way down. So we're trying to tread very carefully on whatever we do here to make sure that we're not, or that we're basically going to bring value to what's going on here. We're reviewing the current definitions, and we're trying to determine if there's consistency in the application when you're creating or you're editing best practices, because that's typically where those are going to be added or modified. We've done a few tests internally on the team, and what we do find is that we're having a kind of a discussion about perception. And depending on what part of the business you come from, wireless, wireline, 911, vendor, that kind of skews your point of view when you're trying to assign a priority based on the definitions. And so what we're trying to do is look at those definitions and determine if we can bring some more consistency into the application so that regardless of the sector or the job function you're in, they fit more broadly across the whole line of best practices. We're looking also at considering the need of the continued need for the 3 priority ranking, critical, highly important versus some other ranking. Do we need 3? Do we need 2? Do we need more? We're just kind of debating that right now and trying to make sure, again, that we're doing the best job that we can for best practices. And we're also then looking and considering alternative definitions that may actually improve on Working Group 6 original intent. Again, we're looking for consistency, application, and bringing as much value to a best practice as possible with the prioritization. And then if I'll move to slide 6, what our next steps are for Working Group 7 is that we're working on completing our definition review and we're running some additional testing, and we're going to finish that up in December. We'll continue doing some testing on a small subset of best practices on any new definition or new process that we come up with during our debates, and basically run through and do some online testing to make sure that the consistency there is there and that we keep the standard as high as possible. And then that'll be done by the end of December. That's our target. And then the last thing for us to do is once we've kind of packaged that up, then our goal is to look at all 1,000 plus best practices and run down through any of our final recommendations and redefine those priorities if necessary. And with the final goal of getting our target final report in March of 2015, and that which will wrap up our final item. So that's the short sum of it. That's where we're at. We're meeting regularly. We will be working very diligently on this over the next couple months. So you can look forward to a good report in March. So I'll open the floor for any comments.
Thanks, Robin. Comments or questions from the room?
Just thanks very much for the hard work of this group. I think it's going to be so important as that list grows that we also have a way for companies to search that and to find out what's relevant to them. In addition to just the priority piece, the how is it discoverable, and we'll want to work with you all once the recommendations are complete to ensure that the product of your work is discoverable in an efficient manner.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the bridge?
Great, thank you.
Hearing none, thank you, Robin, for that report. And that was the last report and item on today's agenda. Thank you to all the speakers and council members and members of the various working groups. And now I'll turn it to Admiral Simpson to say a couple of words in closing.
Not a whole lot here, just in general, thank you again to everyone involved. I'm seeing real synergy between the efforts of the different working groups that I think really speaks well to the commitment of the industry as a whole to really seriously consider these issues and then to develop pragmatic, implementable kinds of recommendations. So look very much to going into detail on the three items that were voted out today and seeing how we might best utilize that and continuing to cheer on and provide enthusiasm for Robert's group. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just say one thing in closing. I also want to thank all of you and thank the groups that presented reports today. They were well done. And they will be very useful to us. I want to give a special thanks to Donna for stepping up and doing a great job. So thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. And now I wish you all the warmest, happiest holiday season. I'll see you all back here on March 18th next year. Okay? Thank you.